My sister abandoned her baby on my porch and disappeared. My parents said, "She's your burden now." A decade later, they dragged me to court for custody, claiming I kept them apart. But when I handed the judge a sealed envelope, his face froze. He whispered, "Do they realize what you're holding?" I just nodded, prepared to answer. I never planned to be anyone's parent. At 23, I was still figuring out my own life, working long shifts, barely making rent, eating instant noodles more nights than I'd admit. But the night my sister left that baby on my porch, everything I thought I knew about responsibility shattered. She didn't knock. She didn't even wait. I opened the door to the sound of crying, and there he was, tiny, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and cheap perfume. There was no note, just the weight of him in my arms and the gut-punch realization that she was gone. When I called my parents, expecting panic or at least a plan, they barely reacted. My mom sighed, almost annoyed, and said, "She's always been dramatic. He's your burden now." My dad didn't argue. No offers of help, no talk of police or child services. Just silence on the line, and then a click when they hung up. That was the first time I understood how deep their favoritism ran. My sister was the golden child, the one they coddled even as she racked up debt, skipped jobs, and burned through relationships. I was the reliable one, the mule. If something needed to be carried, it was dumped on me. And now, that included a baby. I didn't know what I was doing. Those first nights were chaos, bottle feeding at 3 a.m., rocking him in my arms while trying not to cry myself. I was terrified I'd break him, that one wrong move would ruin his life. But somehow, I figured it out. Formula, diapers, doctor visits, it became my world. I learned to live without sleep, to stretch my paycheck until it screamed, to smile at daycare teachers even when I was running late and half dead from another double shift. Through all of it, my parents never showed up. They didn't ask about him. They didn't offer money, food, or even a break. It was as if he never existed to them. The only words they ever repeated were, "Your sister will come back. Don't get too attached." But years went by, and she didn't. Birthdays, scraped knees, school projects, I was the one there. He started calling me Dad before he could pronounce my actual name. And when people asked, I stopped correcting them. He wasn't mine by blood, but he was mine in every way that mattered. Still, I never stopped wondering about that night. Why she left him. Why my parents were so quick to wash their hands of the whole thing. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was building a life with this kid regardless of their absence. But deep down, I knew silence never lasts. And I was right. 10 years after that first cry pierced the night, a letter came. A summons. My parents had decided they wanted custody. They claimed I'd stolen their grandson, poisoned him against the family, kept them apart. I stared at the paper, my hands shaking. After a decade of indifference, they wanted him back. Not out of love, not out of guilt, but for reasons I couldn't yet see. I folded the letter and set it on the table. For the first time in years, I felt the same weight as the night I opened that door. Only this time, I wasn't just a scared kid. I was a father ready to fight. The summons sat on my kitchen table like a loaded gun. I must have read it 20 times, hoping the words would shift into something else, some mistake. But there it was in black and white. My parents, the same people who dismissed my nephew as my burden, were suing me for custody. I laughed at first, bitter and sharp. Custody? After 10 years of silence? After a decade where they never so much as sent a birthday card or showed up for a school play? But the more I read, the colder it felt. Their lawyer had filed claims that I'd intentionally cut them off from their grandson, poisoned him against them, and kept them from building a relationship. They painted me as manipulative, selfish, a jailer keeping a child locked away. My chest burned with a mix of rage and disbelief. They weren't just trying to take him away from me. They were rewriting history, turning their absence into my crime. I picked up the phone and called my mother. When she answered, her voice was syrupy sweet, the way she used to talk to church friends when she wanted to sound saintly. "Mom, what the hell is this?" I snapped. "Oh, honey," she cooed, as if I'd asked about the weather. "We're only doing what's right for him. You've done your best, but he deserves to know his real family." His real family? My hand gripped the phone so tight my knuckles cracked. I've been raising him for 10 years. Alone. Where were you? She sighed, the martyr routine sliding in. You never let us in. Every time we asked, you kept him from us. What choice did we have but to go to court? It was like being gaslit in real time. I remembered those nights begging for help, her dismissive tone. Don't get too attached. Now she was rewriting it all, making me the villain. When I hung up, I felt the air leave my lungs. This wasn't just a fight over custody. It was a fight over the truth. And the truth was something they had spent years burying. The next week, I walked into the courthouse for the preliminary hearing. My palms were slick with sweat, but I forced myself to look steady, collected. My nephew clutched my hand, not fully understanding, just sensing the tension in the air. And then I saw him, the man standing beside my parents at the plaintiff's table, their lawyer, a face I knew all too well. Mr. Aldridge, a family friend, the kind who always helped at barbecues, who slipped my sister cash when she was in trouble, who whispered in my parents' ears about how to manage their children. He was a snake, notorious for twisting words until people doubted their own memories. Seeing him there told me everything. This wasn't just about custody. My parents were playing dirty from the start, rewriting the past, building a case from lies and manipulation. As the judge called the session to order, my stomach churned. I realized I was walking into a storm far bigger than I'd imagined. And then I noticed something else. The way Aldridge smirked at me, like he already knew the ending of a story I hadn't even begun to tell. The night after that first hearing, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying Aldridge's smirk, the rehearsed lines my parents delivered as if they had been practicing them for months. The judge hadn't made any decisions yet. This was only the start, but I could already feel the weight of their story pressing down on me. If they were willing to lie so easily in front of a courtroom, what else were they hiding? I sat at my kitchen table long after my nephew went to bed, flipping through old folders and boxes I had kept tucked away in the closet. Half of it was junk, receipts, daycare payment slips, school newsletters I couldn't bear to throw out. But part of me hoped something in those piles could serve as proof that I hadn't kept him from anyone, that I had been raising him openly, without interference. Hours passed before I dragged out the last dusty box. It was one I hadn't touched in years. Inside were pieces of my sister's life she'd left behind the night she disappeared. An old jacket, photos from when she was a teenager, a half-empty notebook filled with doodles and phone numbers I didn't recognize. And then I saw it. A thick envelope, sealed with red wax like something out of another century. My heart stuttered. The seal was unbroken, my sister's initials faintly scrawled across the front. I froze with it in my hands. For 10 years, I had ignored that box. I couldn't face it. Not the memories of the night she left, not the weight of wondering why. Now the envelope felt almost alive, pulsing with answers I wasn't sure I wanted. I placed it on the table and stared at it under the dim kitchen light. Should I open it? What if it was nothing, just old bills, some half-baked apology? Or worse, what if it confirmed what my parents were saying, that she had never meant for me to keep him? I sat there, palms sweaty, running through every possibility. My parents had spun their version of the story so convincingly in court that I needed something, anything, to fight back with. If this envelope had even a shred of truth, it could change everything. Finally, with trembling hands, I broke the wax. Inside were 2 folded papers. The first looked official, printed, signed, dated. My breath caught. The second was handwritten, a letter in her messy scrawl. I didn't read them right away. I just stared, the edges cutting into my fingers as I held them. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would wake the whole house. For 10 years, I had lived with the question of why she left. And now, sitting alone in my kitchen, I was holding the answer. I leaned back in the chair, fighting the urge to vomit from the sheer weight of it. Whatever these papers contained, they weren't just about me. They were about him, the boy asleep in the next room, who trusted me to keep his world safe. I closed my eyes and whispered to no one. Please, let this be the truth. Then I unfolded the first page, and what I saw confirmed my worst fears. The paper shook in my hands as I unfolded it. The header alone made my chest tighten. It wasn't a random letter. It was legal, stamped, and notarized, a guardianship declaration. My sister had written, in clear and direct language, that if anything happened to her, or if she chose to leave, custody of her child was to go to me, and only me. Her words were blunt, almost harsh. I don't trust anyone else with him, especially not our parents. They'll ruin him the way they ruined me. Reading that felt like a knife twisting in my gut. It was validation, yes, but it was also raw proof of how broken she had been, how abandoned she must have felt by the very people now trying to act like saviors. I set the document down, my hands shaking. For years, I had built my life around doing right by this kid, but a piece of me always feared I'd stolen him somehow. Just taken him and claimed him as my own because she was gone. Now, staring at her signature, I realized she had chosen me. She had entrusted me. The burden I carried wasn't an accident. It was her last act of faith. I picked up the second page, the handwritten letter. Her messy scrawl made my throat tighten instantly. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't stay. You know me. I run when things get too heavy. But this time, I had to make a choice. He deserves better than the chaos I bring. And you've always been the only one who showed me real love, even when I didn't deserve it. Take care of him, and don't let them near him. They'll twist him, like they twisted me. If anyone questions this, show them this letter. Let the truth be my voice. Tears blurred the ink on the page. She wasn't just gone. She had left knowing exactly what she was doing. She had known our parents, known their poison, and begged me to protect him. I pressed the letter to my chest, the air wheezing out of me. A decade of doubt, of exhaustion, of half suspecting I'd been doing something wrong. It all collapsed under the weight of her words. I wasn't the thief. I was the shield. But alongside the relief came something darker. In her final lines, she wrote, "They know what they did. That's why I can't go back." The sentence replayed in my mind like an echo. What did she mean? What had they done? I shoved the letter back into the envelope, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. The guardianship document was solid, legally binding, but the letter was dynamite. It hinted at something deeper, something ugly buried in our family's past, something my parents were desperate to keep hidden. I tried to sleep that night, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw her handwriting, her plea. Don't let them near him. My parents hadn't just abandoned me when she left. They had deliberately stayed away. Why? Because they didn't care? Or because they knew if they got too close, I'd start asking questions they couldn't answer? By morning, I had made my decision. I slipped both papers into a plastic sleeve and placed them in a secure folder. If my parents wanted a fight, I was ready. But a part of me knew these documents weren't just a shield in court. They were a sword. And the second I revealed them, it wouldn't just be about custody anymore. The next hearing was scheduled for the following week. I walked into that courthouse with the envelope tucked inside my briefcase, my palms sweating every time I touched the leather handle. My parents sat across the aisle, smug in their certainty. Aldridge leaned in and whispered something to my father, both of them chuckling under their breath. I almost pitied them. They had no idea what I was holding. When the judge entered, my heart hammered against my ribs. We were sworn in. Aldridge began with his polished speech about a loving family deprived of their rightful bond, spinning a tale so far from reality it made my skin crawl. My parents nodded along, their faces masks of heartbreak. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay quiet. This wasn't the moment yet. Not until they buried themselves deeper in their lies. Not until I was sure the impact would be undeniable. Because once I handed that envelope over, everything, our family, their reputation, the entire truth, was going to explode. And I was finally ready for it. I couldn't stop replaying her words in my head. They know what they did. The legal declaration was ironclad, enough to win custody on its own. But the letter was different. It wasn't just a defense, it was an accusation. My sister had carried something heavy, something she was too broken to face, and now she had passed it to me without spelling it out. For days, I tried to push the thought aside. Maybe she'd just meant their constant belittling, the way they had controlled her life, smothered her independence until she spiraled. That alone was bad enough. But deep down, I knew she meant more. One evening, while my nephew was at a friend's house, I pulled out the old box again. There had to be something else, some missing piece. I dug through every scrap of her life she had left behind. Old receipts, photos, scribbled notes. My hands shook as I flipped through pages of her notebook. Most of it was nonsense, half-finished poems, doodles, angry lists of bills she couldn't pay. And then I found a folded sheet wedged between the back cover and the cardboard. My throat went dry as I pulled it free. It was a printed email chain, clearly one she had bothered to keep. The messages were between her and my father. The words made my blood run cold. She had begged him for help, told him she was drowning in debt, that the man she was with at the time was violent, unstable, and that she was scared for the baby. His response was brutal. You made your bed, you lie in it. Don't bring shame to this family. We don't want the neighbors knowing your mistakes. It wasn't just neglect, It was deliberate cruelty. He knew she was in danger. He knew that child was in danger. And he chose silence because he cared more about appearances than his daughter's life. I sat there with the printout in my hands, trembling. This was it. This was what she meant. They didn't just fail her, they actively turned their backs when she needed them most. And now, a decade later, they were parading into court pretending to be the loving grandparents robbed of their bond. My stomach twisted with disgust. I thought about my nephew, asleep in his bed every night, safe because of me. What if I hadn't opened that door? What if she had left him somewhere else, where no one cared enough to pick him up? He wouldn't even be here. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. All those years, they called me stubborn, ungrateful, difficult. But the truth was, I had been the only one willing to do what they wouldn't. And now they had the audacity to drag me into court, to smear my name, to claw at the one good thing my sister left behind. I placed the email printout in the same folder as the guardianship declaration and her letter. Together, they painted a picture my parents couldn't talk their way out of. But I also knew something else. Once I revealed these documents, there would be no going back. This wasn't just about custody anymore. It was about exposing them for who they really were. And as much as I wanted justice, a small part of me hesitated. Destroying them in court meant destroying the fragile illusion of family that still clung to us. It meant making my nephew see his grandparents for what they truly were. I closed the folder and pressed it to my chest. This went so much deeper than I thought. I sat at the edge of my bed, the folder resting on my lap like it weighed 100 pounds. The guardianship papers, her letter, the email chain, they were enough to bury my parents in court, maybe even outside of it. One move, and the mask they had worn for decades would crumble in front of everyone. But every time I pictured sliding those documents across the table, I hesitated. Because this wasn't just about them. It was about him, my nephew, the boy who still asked why his grandparents never visited, who still smiled when they occasionally sent a half-hearted birthday card in the mail. To him, family was still something fragile, something worth holding on to. If I exposed the truth, he'd never see them the same way again. Maybe that was a good thing. Maybe it would save him from the lies I grew up swallowing. But part of me couldn't shake the guilt. Was I protecting him, or was I about to shatter his last illusions? Night after night, I paced the living room, rehearsing arguments, imagining the judge's questions, hearing my parents' voices in my head twisting every fact into a weapon. One part of me wanted to burn it all down, to finally watch them choke on the truth they'd buried. Another part whispered, what if this makes everything worse? I remembered holding him as a baby, crying in the dark, whispering promises I didn't even know how to keep. I'll protect you. I'll never let anyone hurt you. Those words still haunted me, carved into my bones. Protecting him wasn't always about comfort. It was about making the choices he was too young to make. One dawn, after another sleepless night, I stood at the window watching the sun bleed across the sky. My reflection stared back at me, hollow eyes, clenched jaw, and I knew I couldn't keep protecting my parents' image at the expense of his safety. The truth wasn't mine to hide anymore. It was time to fight. The second court date felt heavier than the first. I walked in with my nephew's small hand in mine, his wide eyes darting around the marble walls and echoing footsteps. He didn't understand the weight of the room, but I did. Every breath I took felt like it carried 10 years of struggle. My parents sat across from me, dressed in somber colors as though they were grieving saints. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue before the judge even entered, a performance she'd perfected long before this. My father sat stone-faced, his arms crossed, radiating righteous indignation. And there was Aldridge again, shuffling papers with that smug curve at the corner of his lips. The judge asked us to be seated, and the hearing began. Aldridge wasted no time. Your Honor, he began smoothly. This case is about a child robbed of his rightful family. For 10 years, my clients were denied access, manipulated into silence by their son, who, while well-meaning, acted selfishly and against the boy's best interests. The words stung even though I'd expected them. I sat stiffly, forcing myself not to react, not to let them see me flinch. My parents nodded in rhythm with every phrase, as though Aldridge's words were gospel. My mother even glanced at me with a look of wounded disappointment, like, see what you made us do? When the judge asked for my response, I swallowed hard and stood. My voice was steadier than I expected. Your Honor, I've raised him since the night his mother left him on my doorstep. Not once in 10 years did my parents offer support. Not once did they ask to visit or help. Now they come here and paint themselves as victims. Aldridge cut in, pretending outrage. We have evidence of repeated attempts to contact him. Phone calls, letters. Evidence manufactured after the fact. I shot back, heat rising in my chest. I have records of my own. I begged them for help in those first months. They told me I was on my own. The judge held up a hand, silencing us both. "Mr. Davis," he said to me, "do you have proof of this?" I felt my hand twitch toward the briefcase at my feet. The folder was inside, its edges burning against my mind. One move, and I could shatter their story. But something in me said, not yet. Instead, I reached for a different file, a stack of daycare invoices, school registrations, doctor bills, all in my name, paid with my sweat. I slid them forward. "This is proof," I said quietly. "I've been his father in every way but on paper. If they cared so much, why didn't they show up once in 10 years? The judge studied the stack, his expression unreadable. My parents shifted uneasily, though my mother still sniffled on cue. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, it was enough. Maybe the truth of lived reality could outweigh their lies. But when the session ended, Aldridge's smirk returned, sharper than before. He knew I was holding back. He knew there was more. And he was right. As I walked out with my nephew clutching my hand, I whispered to myself, "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." For a brief moment, I let myself believe it was over. After that hearing, the judge seemed unconvinced by my parents' performance. He had asked hard questions Aldridge couldn't fully answer, and when we left the courtroom, I felt the smallest flicker of relief. That evening, as I cooked dinner, my nephew laughed at something on TV, his voice filling the house. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe. Maybe the judge had seen through their lies. Maybe this nightmare was already unraveling. A few days later, Aldridge's office called. He wanted to discuss a settlement. My stomach tightened, but I listened. His tone was polite, measured, almost sympathetic. "There's no need to drag this boy through a trial," he said. "If you agree to shared custody, or at least allow the grandparents' legal visitation, we can end this here. No more court, no more fighting." On the surface, it sounded tempting. Less stress, less public spectacle. A way out. For half a second, I wondered if it was the best compromise. Let them visit once in a while, keep the peace. But then I saw my nephew's face as he ran into the kitchen asking if dinner was ready. His eyes bright, trusting me without question. I remembered my sister's handwriting. Don't let them near him. They'll twist him the way they twisted me. Still, doubt lingered. Could I really keep him from grandparents who claimed to love him? Was I crossing the line from protector to jailer, just as they accused me? That night, as I took out the trash, headlights swept across the driveway. My parents' car rolled up, slow and deliberate. My father leaned out the window, his voice low and sharp. "You think you've won," he sneered. "But you have no idea how far we're willing to go." The brief calm I'd felt shattered instantly. The fight was only just beginning. The next hearing was unlike the others. From the second I stepped into the courtroom, I could feel the atmosphere had shifted. My parents weren't sitting quietly this time. They were flanked by people. Neighbors. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Even an old family friend from church. All of them had been summoned as witnesses. Aldridge looked like a man preparing for a victory lap. He stacked papers neatly, tapping his pen against the table as if he had rehearsed every beat of this performance. When the judge entered, the room settled into silence, but I could already sense what was coming. The first witness, our former neighbor, walked nervously to the stand. Under oath, she claimed she had seen me, turning my parents away when they came to visit. That they had stood on the porch, begging to see their grandson, and I slammed the door in their faces. I gritted my teeth so hard my jaw ached. That never happened. They never came. But she spoke with such conviction that I saw the judge's brows knit in concentration. Next came my cousin. He claimed my parents constantly asked to be part of the boy's life, but that I blocked every attempt. He even fabricated details, like how my father had once shown up with Christmas gifts only for me to refuse them at the door. My hands curled into fists beneath the table. Christmases came and went with nothing from them. Nothing. Each new witness piled on, and I could feel the walls closing in. My parents sat with mournful faces, nodding as though each lie was a dagger to their hearts. My mother dabbed her eyes dramatically. My father stared at me like I was a stranger who had stolen something precious. For a moment, I felt the ground slipping out from under me. This was more than lies. It was a coordinated ambush. They weren't just twisting the truth. They were fabricating an entire history, brick by brick, until even I could almost see it. I glanced at my nephew sitting quietly beside our advocate, his legs swinging nervously beneath the bench. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the mood. His wide eyes flicked between me and the judge, searching for reassurance. My chest tightened. By the time the last witness finished, I felt raw, like I'd been beaten without ever leaving my chair. Aldridge rose, smoothing his suit jacket, and addressed the court with practiced sorrow. "Your Honor," he said, "what we see here is a child deprived of his rightful family. The defendant has done an admirable job raising him, but at the cost of severing natural, loving ties. My clients don't wish to erase his bond with their son. They only want to share in his life, as any grandparents would. Is that too much to ask?" His words were slick, poisoned honey. I saw the judge lean back, expression unreadable, but I caught the faintest flicker of consideration. My stomach dropped. I knew then, if I didn't act, I could lose everything. I reached down, fingers brushing the leather of my briefcase. Inside, the folder waited. The guardianship declaration, my sister's letter, the email, evidence not just of her wishes, but of who my parents really were. My pulse thundered. Handing it over would end this charade, but it would also set fire to the last remnants of our family name. Once the truth was out, there was no putting it back. I looked at my parents across the aisle. My mother clutched her tissue like a relic, my father's lips pressed in a tight line. They thought they had me cornered. They thought their lies could drown me, but they had no idea what I was holding. Slowly, I straightened, my hand tightening around the briefcase handle. I could almost hear my sister's voice in my head. "Don't let them near him." When the judge asked if I had anything further to add, I stood. My voice was steady, though inside I was shaking. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "I have something you need to see." And I laid the envelope on the table. The envelope sat on the polished wood of the courtroom table, small and ordinary in appearance, yet heavy enough to silence the entire room. My palms were damp. My throat felt raw. For years I had carried this weight alone, and now I was about to hand it over, knowing that once it left my hands, nothing would ever be the same again. The judge leaned forward, curiosity flickering across his face. "Mr. Davis, what is this?" I swallowed hard. "Evidence. Directly from the child's mother." My voice cracked slightly, but I steadied it. "It explains why I've been raising him, why she chose me, and why my parents," I paused, glancing across the aisle, "should never have custody." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. My mother's tissue slipped from her hand. My father shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening, the mask beginning to crack. Aldridge's smirk faltered for the first time. But even as I slid the envelope forward, a wave of doubt crashed over me. What if the judge questioned its authenticity? What if he dismissed my sister's words as desperation, or worse, as fabrication? What if exposing everything didn't just destroy my parents' credibility, but poison my nephew against his entire family forever? I felt sick. My vision blurred for a moment. My nephew's face flashed in my mind. Those wide, trusting eyes, the way he clung to me in court, the way he called me dad without hesitation. I had promised him safety, not scandal. Was I keeping that promise, or was I dragging him into a war he never asked for? The judge broke the seal slowly, deliberately, as though he knew the weight of the moment. He unfolded the first page, his eyes scanning the notarized declaration. His expression shifted, first surprise, then sharp focus. He looked up at me. "Mr. Davis, do they realize what you're holding?" The room seemed to tilt. My heart pounded so loud it drowned out every other sound. I managed a nod, though my body screamed to collapse into the chair. My mother whispered something frantic to Aldridge, her face pale now, her tears replaced by fear. My father sat rigid, his eyes fixed on the papers as though sheer willpower could erase the words. The judge turned the page, now reading my sister's letter. His lips pressed into a thin line, and for the first time since this began, he seemed human, less like an official, more like a man who had just been handed a window into tragedy. When he looked up again, his voice was quieter, but edged with steel. "We'll need to recess. I have to review these documents in full." The gavel struck, and the room stirred back to life, but I barely heard it. My knees were weak, my chest tight. I had just thrown a grenade into the middle of my family's world. and now I had to wait for the explosion. The next hearing felt like walking back into a battlefield after setting off explosives. Word had clearly spread through the courthouse. There were more eyes on us this time, more whispers when I entered with my nephew at my side. My parents sat stiffly across the aisle, their expressions tighter, their lawyer visibly rattled. The smugness was gone. The judge entered with the envelope in his hand. His face was unreadable, but the room seemed to hold its breath. He shuffled the papers deliberately, then raised his eyes. "I've reviewed the documents submitted by Mr. Davis," he began. "They include a notarized guardianship declaration, signed by the child's biological mother, as well as a handwritten statement corroborating her intent. Additionally, there are communications between the mother and the petitioners, communications which raise serious questions about the petitioner's credibility and priorities at the time of her crisis." A murmur swept across the gallery. My mother's face drained of color, and for the first time, my father's confident posture sagged. Aldridge stood abruptly. "Your Honor, we dispute the authenticity of those documents." The judge cut him off, his tone sharper than I'd ever heard it. "Sit down, counsel. These documents have already been verified by the clerk's office. The signatures match. The notary record is legitimate. The handwriting analysis is consistent. Unless you intend to accuse this court of fraud, I suggest you proceed carefully." The silence that followed was suffocating. Aldridge lowered himself back into his seat, his jaw tight. I watched my parents squirm, their entire facade crumbling. My mother clutched the armrest like she might faint. My father stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, but his eyes betrayed panic. The judge leaned forward. "What concerns me most, however, is not merely the mother's explicit instructions, but the content of her letter. She entrusted this child to Mr. Davis because she feared what would happen if he remained in the care of her parents. She wrote that they would twist him the way they twisted her. And the emails submitted confirm she sought help and was refused, out of concern for family image rather than her well-being or the well-being of her child." He let the words hang, heavy as lead. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to hold steady, my hand resting gently on my nephew's shoulder. The judge's tone shifted, final and cold. "This court does not look kindly on those who attempt to manipulate the truth or weaponize the legal system for control. Based on the evidence provided, custody will remain with Mr. Davis. The petitioner's request is denied in full." A gasp escaped my mother. My father slammed a hand against the table, but the bailiff moved closer, and he sank back down, seething. The judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he continued, "this court is considering sanctions against the petitioners for knowingly submitting false testimony through their witnesses. Perjury is not taken lightly. Mr. Aldridge, I suggest you advise your clients to tread carefully moving forward." I felt the breath leave me in a rush, like I had been holding it for 10 years. The room blurred for a second, but then I caught sight of my nephew's small smile. Confused, maybe, but relieved. He knew we'd won, even if he didn't fully understand how. My parents sat frozen, the mask shattered. My mother's tears were no longer an act. My father's shoulders slumped as though the weight of decades had suddenly landed on him. For once, they looked small. When the gavel struck, ending the session, I didn't move right away. I just sat there, absorbing the finality. It was over. The lies, the manipulation, the years of being treated as nothing more than a tool. They had tried to erase me, and instead, they had erased themselves. As I stood, Aldridge wouldn't meet my eyes. My parents did, though, and what I saw there wasn't anger anymore. It was fear. I picked up the folder, slipped it back into my briefcase, and walked out with my nephew's hand in mine. For the first time since that night 10 years ago, when my sister left him on my porch, I didn't feel like I was carrying a burden. I felt like I had finally laid one down.